We made this.
Hello and welcome to CHUCKYVISION, the podcast about the Child's Play franchise, Chucky franchise, not 100% sure what we're calling it, but Chucky films and TV series right here on the We Made This podcast network. My name's Mark Adams and I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by Dev Elson. Hello, Dev.
Hey everyone, very excited to actually get into it. I mean, I was very excited just to talk in the primer, which was meant to be 20 minutes, ended up being almost an hour. Let's try and keep this concise. It was planned to be an hour. Let's hope it doesn't end up like 3 hours.
I'm not sure brevity is my strength, I'll be honest with you. But I don't care. We're talking about Chucky, and it's great. And I think what we discovered in the primer was that we're both clearly very enthusiastic about it. And at a kind of glance, Chucky's perhaps seen as quite a simple franchise, quite a, you know exactly what it's about. But I think we had so much to talk about that perhaps that isn't true.
No, I mean, as much as I enjoyed that primer chat, like, there were so many moments where we would reference, like, a director or reference, a certain film, and I was like, oh, I just want to talk about that for, like, 20 minutes. But we've got to save those conversations for the specific films.
I think so. And so this is our first proper episode. Unsurprisingly, we are looking at the original Child's Play from 1988. Rated 15 in Britain, it has a 71% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Do you feel like that's fair?
I think it was. I think it was quite... when I looked at the reviews, a lot of people were quite positive on it. Both Roger Ebert and Leonard Maltin, we'll get into it, but both of those reviewers gave it like 3 out of 4. They really enjoyed this film, which is shocking because it, I don't think it tries to hide what it is. It's a killer doll movie. I think the director is very precise, but at the same time he knows what he's directing. It doesn't try to be elevated in any way. So I think a lot of critics and a lot of audience people just understood what it was trying to be, and it's it's a clever, above average slasher. Yeah.
And I think you're touching on something that I very much agree with, that horror films tend to get quite harsh reviews. A lot of the time, I think, if you go into a horror film expecting the most sophisticated and intelligent fucking Oscar bait, of course you're not going to get that. But as horror film goes, this is a really, really exceptional horror film. So I do think it perhaps, 75, 80%. But I'll take 71 because horror films generally get a bad rep anyway.
Exactly. It's very remarkable that it got... But I think I would argue maybe 70% is what, like the writer and the director and stuff were striving for with this, because, when you look at, like, Child's Play, I love the remake of Child's Play, but, like, that film feels quite on the nose with, like, it's trying to talk about technology, it's trying to talk about consumerism, even the mother, even though it's the same character, it's a bit more on the nose that she's like a single mother trying to like find a new father and stuff. It's all, the writing is all a bit more on the wall, whereas here it's so stripped down that the director Tom Holland, he really stripped everything down to its bare basics, and I think that actually works for the film in that it's it's like a roller coaster. It's not roller coasters don't try to give you a thematic message midway through. It's just a ride from start to finish.
Good point. I like that metaphor. I do. So, Child's Play had a 9 million budget, which was quite a lot for 1988, and made 44 million at the box office, making it a massive hit. And I think if this hadn't been a massive hit, we wouldn't have had 6 more films and or the teleseries we're both really excited about.
Precisely. I don't know if they were expecting to make so much money. I think they were hoping to, but yeah, for a franchise like this, it's a great start. And like so many other horror franchises, I think especially the producers had dollar signs in their eyes when they saw this, and they were already imagining like, oh my god, we could knock out a sequel every year and bring in this amount of money.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened, isn't it?
Yeah, for better and worse. Well, Child's Play 2 is great. Child's Play 3, they were like, not even a year, they were like 9 months later, can we put out a sequel? And they were pushing it a little bit there.
Did you see what the original name for Child's Play was?
They went through a couple, didn't they?
Well, it was Batteries Not Included. And the reason why they didn't call it Batteries Not Included was someone else released a very cutesy kids film called Batteries Not Included. Have you seen that?
I have. Is that the one with the little, like, flying, like, the tiny little UFO flying robot things?
Yes, it is.
Only
It's fucking
vaguely remember.
lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved it as a kid. I mean, as I said in the primer, it came out in 1988, the same year as Child's Play, Batteries Not Included. So I did see that. I don't think I saw it at the cinema. I think I saw it quite early on VHS. So I maybe watched it in 1989, probably. But I loved Batteries Not Included as a kid. It was just so lovely. These cute little spaceships come to visit, and maybe we should do that as a special.
Technically connected, yeah. Well, it is all weirdly connected because, just as an aside, yeah, the producer on this, David Kirshner, who had a hand in creating the first Child's Play and some of the sequels especially, he had just worked with Steven Spielberg on An American Tail, which again is also like this really cutesy animated kids film. And then he came across a book, like one of those paperback horror like schlock novels called The Dollhouse Murders, and just very suddenly he was like, I want to make a horror film about like killer dolls. And that was a weird start to this.
I think the killer doll idea it wasn't original. There's certainly been stuff on the Twilight Zone and a few films prior to Child's Play, but I do feel like Chucky is the iconic killer doll. I don't think Dolly Dearest can really compete. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah. There were probably shark movies, and there were shark movies before Jaws, but every shark movie after Jaws has some DNA taken from Jaws, and that's exactly the same with this. It's very strange to imagine that David Kirshner wanted to produce a Killer Doll movie, and he was looking around and just happened to find a Killer Doll movie written by a very young Don Mancini. And it's interesting to think what other Killer Doll movies, like scripts, were just floating about that he could have found. Like it could have been a completely different alternate timeline.
I think we can quite happily cover many other Killer Doll movies as we go forward after we've looked at the main Child's Play films and Chucky series, but maybe do it at a more leisurely pace.
Precisely, yeah, because I mean they are weirdly all connected. Like Mancini got turned down by a lot of people with his script, and he even pitched to Charles Band, and then he was in charge of Full Moon Productions, or in the 80s it may have been still Empire Productions, but he became Full Moon Productions. And if you know those guys, their most popular film franchise came shortly after this, was the Puppet Master franchise. So whether or not he intentionally felt like he lost out on turning down Chucky, but yeah, that's another example of Child's Play comes out and suddenly everyone has killer doll fever.
Yeah, I remember seeing Dolly Dearest around the same time as I saw Child's Play. Remember I was talking in the primer about our 15-year-old horror parties? That was a 15 as well. So that was another one that we rented out. And Dolly Dearest is good,
Yeah,
but
is
it's
that...
not as good as Child's Play.
I was trying to remember. Is that the one with Rip Torn?
Yes, it is, with like
That's a very weird performance from him.
bad Mexican juju creates many, many killer women, like female dolls in this case, not boy dolls.
That is a very strange film. I feel like if Don Mancini got his hands on that, that could become a very weird camp story, especially with Mexican Rip Torn still in it.
Yeah, we're going to do Dolly Dearest, but not for a while, I think. Moving back before we get too distracted, the name Charles Lee Ray is inspired by Charles Manson, who murdered many people and led a cult. Lee Harvey Oswald, who, well, we think shot John F. Kennedy. And James Earl Ray, who was the guy who killed Martin Luther King. I just think that's really fucking morbid. They could have just called him John Smith or something. Why do they really have to do that?
It's such an odd film, the first film, because they really, on some parts, set him up as this, like, the world's worst murderer, and at other parts, he doesn't seem, well, not too bad, but, he seems quite...
Campy.
Quite uniquely human and desperate at times. It's almost like they didn't quite know how big he was going to get. But what's interesting, though, is that it took a while for Charles Lee Ray, or Chucky himself, to actually get into the film, didn't it?
Yeah.
Don Mancini's original script, I think the original one, was that it was at one point called Blood Buddy, and it was about these dolls called I don't know if they were called the Blood Buddies, but they were so realistic they could bleed, which I remember Kirshner, the producer, was like, I have a child. He buys dolls. No doll production would ever put out a doll that could bleed.
Yeah, that's pretty minging.
But Mancini had this idea that Andy's blood would merge with the doll's blood, and his like repressed rage as a child would be transferred into this doll. And then when director Tom Holland came on board, him and Kirshner got together, and they just really didn't like the idea. They didn't feel it worked, and they talked.
That's because it's a crap idea.
And that's what is so weird, because Don Mancini is credited as the creator of Chucky. You know, he helms this entire franchise, and yet it wasn't his idea. Like, it was his original idea was so different, and it was the combined talents of Holland, Kirshner, and the co-writer John Lafia. They themselves like created this idea of what if a serial killer. The original concept was what if a serial killer was executed at the same time a production assembly line was working, and like his soul would electronically go into one of the dolls. And so they pretty much created the whole premise of the franchise, that a serial killer's soul would transfer into a doll.
Yeah, I think as soon as you talked about specific timings of a serial killer's death, it made me think of the Wes Craven film Shocker.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we didn't get Shocker. As much as I love Shocker and think it's a fucking superb film, absolutely batshit crazy. But I'm glad that Don Mancini got this help. But I'm also glad that he kind of stepped off on his own afterwards, because I think we just had a lot of luck here creating the franchise that we love.
Exactly. It's such a weird medley to look into, because I think just watching the film, it feels like such a strong introduction to the character and such a strong introduction to the franchise. And yet, it was a road of discovery of them trying to perfect what this idea was. And there was some arguments. There was some contention between the creative talents that we'll get into shortly. You know, it could have turned out a number of different ways.
Yeah, it really could. Before we do get into the nitty-gritty of the film, where did you watch this, Dev?
Me? Oh, God, when was the first time I watched Child's Play 1? probably online somewhere.
Really? Fuck, you're so young.
I know. Well, I was going to mention this in the primer when we're talking about getting into horror. I got into horror during the early 2000s when torrenting wasn't really a thing. Just there were people might find it a little bit, well, I don't think people are even people. Some people are torrenting, but some people are just like there's so much streaming available. It's like you can find the movie somewhere. Whereas back in the day, it was like illegal streaming was basically like you could just find a website and there was pretty much any movie on there. I remember watching in the public library. I watched the first 5 Saw films.
How old were you?
Oh god, probably like 15 or something like that.
That's naughty.
And I had my headphones in, but like just like elderly people coming in to check the internet and check their emails would just walk past me just watching a Saw film on a public computer. So that is probably how I watched some of these early films.
I used to work in a library, and I'm surprised that the librarians didn't catch you watching horror films, because we regularly had to check what people were looking at because we had a problem with dirty old men coming in and watching porn.
Oh god, I think I have memories of seeing that sometimes. Yeah.
So here's an interesting fact for you. That obviously pornographic sites are banned in libraries, but also language sites are banned in libraries because people were watching pornography through language translation websites.
Oh, okay. Wow. Wow, those people were desperate. Wow, the internet was a different time.
This was like 5 or 6 years ago, Dev.
Okay, maybe not a different time. Maybe just different circumstances for those people who didn't have home computers.
Seriously, if you've not got a home computer, don't watch porn at a library. Just get your old vids. Get your old vids on. I don't get it. Fuck's sake. But yeah, naughty boy. Funnily enough, I first watched this, as I mentioned in the primer, in one of my kind of like horror parties with my friends before we discovered drinking and nightclubs and shagging, and it was great. But more recently, I bought the DVD off eBay, and it cost me £2.25.
Yeah, that's kind of a common occurrence, isn't it? Really, like I looked at Friday the 13th Part 6 the other day, and it's like, yeah, they're not these. Some of these horror films, even though they're big ones, they're not even on horror streaming sites like Shudder.
No.
So it's like it's a really well-known film, but the likelihood is you're going to have to get it on DVD for cheap, or just pony up and get the full Blu-ray.
So for me, when something isn't on a streaming service, I don't really have a DVD collection anymore. But when something isn't on a streaming service and I want to watch it, I'll look at how much it costs on Amazon Prime. And if I can get it on DVD for cheaper off eBay, that's what I do. And that's what I did in this case, because £3.50 on Prime, it's not on Netflix, it's not on Shudder or Now, or indeed anything that I could find as a stream, other than pay for it on Prime.
Yeah, I've done the same. If I'm going to watch a movie for a review or something, I'm probably going to buy the DVD rather than renting it.
It just seems fucking odd that, knowing damn well that a new teleseries is coming out based on this franchise, that none of the streaming services would think that it was a good idea to have these films to stream. When I was looking, 3 of them are on Netflix. I think it's Seed, Cult, and Curse are on Netflix. And the rest of them aren't, which is bobbins.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen, I keep getting recommended Seed of Chucky on my Netflix, so they know what I like. But, I mean, thank God Curse and Cult are on there, because, as we said, those films are kind of slept on, even by people who are interested in Child's Play and are probably going to watch the show. So at least we got the last couple ones on there.
Yeah, true. So should we get down to it and have a bit of a chat about Child's Play?
Yes, let's get right into it. Yeah.
So the first thing I noticed made me cross, and I hadn't noticed before. Co-starring Brad Dourif. He's the fucking star!
Well, he is, and we do see him right off the bat, but then he goes away for quite a while.
He doesn't go away, he's the fucking doll.
But it takes until the midpoint for him to really start talking as Chucky.
Robert Englund is the star of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Therefore, Brad Dourif is the star of the Child's Play. Co-starring can fuck right off. I was quite cross.
I mean, I'm not disputing that, but yeah, especially in hindsight, it's very egregious because, you know, you're probably going to get Catherine Hicks and Chris Sarandon like top billing because, you know, they are like the main characters, but they ain't coming back for any of the sequels.
Funny that. No, I think I'm going to be keeping my beady eye on this. He'd better be the fucking star in Child's Play 2, otherwise I'm going to throw me dummy out the pram again. Did you find it was kind of odd to actually see Charles Lee Ray played by Brad Dourif? Because obviously now I know what he looks like. I've seen Deadwood. I've seen... he was in Lord of the Rings, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was a
Yeah.
I was going to talk about some of his roles. He's Brad Dourif is has an illustrious career in both horror and also mainstream.
I would say that this is probably his most iconic role, but we do know what he looks like because he's been in other stuff. And it felt a little bit weird. I was like, oh yeah, that's actually Brad Dourif, not just his voice.
And he has a weird Tommy Wiseau look going on.
Oh, you can get in the sea. I hadn't spotted that, and now I can't unspot it.
Yeah, he also has the same sort of almost gnarled, like intense, like face as well. Like,
he is a better actor than Tommy fucking Wiseau.
I never said they were on the same level acting wise. No, he is, and there is a lot going on in this opening performance and it's very strange. Again, because in later films he is Chucky the killer doll. It's not. I wouldn't say it's one note, but it's it's a very hammy performance. Whereas here, like because it's its own film, Child's Play, he's really trying to explore every facet of the character because he is both as. I mean, just to mention, he had already had an Oscar nomination, like because of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So he was very well known, and he had done a few films in that span between 75 and 88. He had done a few films, so I think a lot of people did recognize him, and this was his really his first foray into horror. So he has that really intense, disturbed performance going on. But there's also quite a human performance going on, like when his accomplice Eddie drives off, and he sounds just so distraught when he's like, "No, Eddie, no, don't leave me." He sounds so sad. There's almost an element of sympathy towards him.
I think the way the film started, I was like, I feel like we've missed a film, and this is the denouement of that film. Like a crime thriller,
Exactly. Well, I didn't know when I was going to get into it, but Tom Holland's original edit of this film was 2 hours.
Wow.
So I think I've got it listed somewhere. There's a lot of scenes coming out. But yes, this whole prologue was longer. And they really cut... That's why this film feels so tight, because they cut down almost...
It is tight.
They cut down almost every scene. It's like, here's Charles Lee Ray. He's a bad guy. He does a magical spell, and now he's in the doll. That's it. It gets right into it.
I think it benefits from the tightness. I'm not sure it would have been a better film with that director's cut version. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it, but I think this film definitely benefits from just how quick it is.
And I think from the start, the iconic hate-filled voice of Brad Dourif is just so fucking perfect for the part.
Exactly. And that was the other note I was going to make about the film when it was in the editing process. So Don Mancini wrote the film, but there was a writer strike going on at the time. So he felt that he wasn't welcome on set because obviously there would have been some issues with that. And so when he got to see it was during the editing process because everyone thought 2 hours was too long, and a test screening went really badly. So Tom Holland is at some points very nice, but also some points an asshole. And so he was like, "That's it, I'm done with the film. It's not going to be my version. I'm done." So he left, and then Don Mancini sort of helped tidy things up, and they cut out half an hour of the film. But the other crazy thing was, even though Even though Brad Dourif was in the film at the start, even though the doll is modeled on his likeness near the end, he was busy shooting another film during post-production, so he wasn't available. He was potentially not available to actually do some of his lines. Well, even though I don't understand, because I remember reading that they had some of his lines. They had his dialogue recorded because they played it on set. So everything was linked to Brad Dourif. And yet, at some point during the editing, Tom Holland was like, what if I try Jessica Walter as the voice?
Sorry, who?
The actress, the woman from Arrested Development and Archer.
What?
Yeah, the mother from Arrested Development. Because
That would have been shite.
Tom Holland had worked with her on the Clint Eastwood film Play Misty for Me, where she plays a
Great
deranged
film.
she plays like the, deranged stalker. And so
Mm.
Tom Holland had seen The Exorcist, and he thought that, well, if a woman voiced Pazuzu and if a woman played Reagan, then what if the doll was voiced by a woman? And so
For fuck's
so
sake.
this test screening saw a 2-hour version of Child's Play with Jessica Walter voicing Chucky. That is so fucking mind-blowing.
That's batshit.
And then
Jessica Walter's a great actor, but no.
it's so odd that he was like, even though we filmed everything with Brad Dourif, just throw him out. We're not going to use him. And then obviously he came back. That was so weird.
I'm so glad that didn't happen. I mean, I'll be honest, when I heard about the remake, I was like, no one can play Chucky other than Brad Dourif. And then I was like, maybe Mark Hamill can. But I don't think there are many people I would accept to play Chucky other than Brad Dourif.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think they got away with it in the remake of Child's Play because it is very.
Not seen it.
It's
I've
you
actually not seen it.
when we get around to it, it's actually a very good film because he is Chucky, but he's not Charles Lee Ray, and that's
Shall we do it where my first watch is for the podcast? Shall we do it that way?
yeah, certainly because I really like that film. I think it has a lot of really strong moments. I think it's a strong. I mean, I don't know if this is the story, but it feels like it was a really strong killer doll film, like as a script. And then the
Right.
studio was like, well, we want to remake Child's Play. Can we just rewrite the script so Child's Play is in it? So it doesn't feel like the original Child's Play, but that's why it's good. Like Mark Hamill is
Right.
just sort of doing his own thing.
I mean, Mark Hamill tends to do that, and I can't say anything other than I approve of that because he's Mark fucking Hamill.
I mean, it's really good because, as you say, like Brad Dourif brings this really intense rage to the character of Chucky, whereas
He really does.
Mark Hamill brings this really creepy quality because
Okay.
it's like a robot malfunctioning. He does want to be friends with the main kid, so like he's trying to be friendly, but he's coming off really creepy.
Fascinating. I look forward to it. Going back to Child's Play, the original, 1988, what I like is that it isn't shy about the sadness of the situation. The widow who's struggling with money, who's really doing her best, but she simply cannot afford to buy the toy that her child wants. And, that's quite bleak, but a very much believable 80s one-parent situation.
Yes, 2 points about that. I remember Don Mancini. Don Mancini is an openly gay screenwriter, and this definitely feels like the straightest film of the franchise. Like, there's no really camp elements, except maybe near the end from Brad Dourif's performance. But I remember him saying like that was a part of his vision intentionally, that it was going to be this like fatherless family, and there was going to be elements to that. And I think a lot of that got stripped down, especially when Holland like stripped everything down, because as you say, yeah, it is very sad, and there's a realistic streak to her like really trying to provide for her child, but it's also so tightly told that it doesn't linger on anything. You get the note.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think what it's studying, like childhood loneliness and corporate manipulation, these are actually quite sophisticated, or at least quite dark. kind of themes that, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't expect in a horror film. You'd just expect a bunch of kids get fucking stabbed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like it was stronger in Mancini's original script. I mean, he worked in the advertising business, and
Mm.
he saw Cabbage Patch Kids explode, and he saw like, the Black Friday deals where parents would fight each other in the lanes trying over toys and stuff. So he had this vision of violence and children's entertainment crossing over. So I feel like maybe it was stronger, and we're getting notes of that throughout. I mean, it does come through at the start quite clearly because, as we see, I mean, they do a wonderful job in this film setting up.
Yeah.
They do a wonderful job in this film setting up the good guy dolls as an actual brand. It comes across
Yeah.
really strong. I mean, we got like the animated advertisements that feels really real. Like
Mm.
Andy is dressed in his little good guy doll PJs, which becomes a plot point later on, which is clever foreshadowing. And
Adorable as well.
exactly, and just yeah, I mean, it comes through really strong. I did laugh at the idea of Karen is trying to be this really providing mother, but I mean, if your kid wants a doll, like don't buy him the accessories without a doll. That seems like a dick move.
Yeah. I think the good guy doll is clearly inspired by the Cabbage Patch Kids. I think you were right to say that, and I don't remember when Garbage Pail Kids came out, but it was very much Chucky and Garbage Pail Kids that were a reaction to this saccharine, cynical, capitalistic way of just bleeding parents dry with the Cabbage Patch dolls. And yeah, I think, we could probably do an episode on the fucking Garbage Pail Kids
Oh
as a
god!
comparison. Do you remember them?
I've seen some of that film. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, not that film. I meant the stickers. I don't want to watch that damn film.
We'd have more fun just looking at stickers for an hour.
I think we'd suffer for our art if we had to watch the Garbage Pail Kids movie. Bloody hell.
It's an interesting part of that, though, of how Child's Play overshadowed everything, because they did say there was a brand during the 80s of My Buddy dolls. And they said that this was very much directly based on those. And that's interesting because I feel like more people recognize the fictional good guy doll rather than the real My Buddy doll.
Oh, very much so.
They made that note very obvious in the remake, because in the remake, they're not good guy dolls, they're buddy dolls.
Right.
So they just straight up were just like, yeah, this is the reference.
Yeah, and so I remember around this time as I was a kid, dolls were getting more sophisticated. You were getting dolls that talk. And for me, obviously, I was a boy. I didn't want a girl's doll, but I do remember Teddy Ruxpin, which was launched around this time, and you could talk to Teddy Ruxpin like you could talk to a good guy doll, and his mouth moved in a very similar way. He was a teddy, but his mouth moved in a very similar way to the early goings of this film with the good guy dolls, and they really found a zeitgeist and made something creepy as fuck out of it.
I think you're definitely right about what the start of this film is hitting at, because it's such an interesting parallel of like around this time, like women were getting more liberated and more independent, and I think divorce rates and stuff were going up. So there were a lot more like separated and like single mothers and stuff. And this was such a weird aspect of like children's marketing to be like, well, if children don't have as many people to talk to, we're going to make a toy that talks to them. And that this is definitely like an aspect. Like, yes, some like it's like imaginary children, except no, not imaginary children, imaginary friends. Except it's a real friend that has like a certain amount of like lines, and so it's this weird aspect of like, is this good for children?
Yeah, exactly. I think when you look at this film as a whole, it is a little bit classic tropey, the not being believed, the douchebag boss, the weird and wacky killer, but I don't care. Tropes are there for a reason. People fucking like them.
Precisely, yeah. It's a very lean and straightforward film, but it hits all the beats really well. It's the execution that is really good.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think possibly with the exception of the slightly ropey smack in the face with the toy hammer, that there is nothing in this film that I thought, shit horror. I sat there going, this still holds up. It's what, 30 years old, and it still holds up. The effects are great. The story is tight and makes sense. And there's some real horror, real kind of jump scares, real gruesome stuff. There's the real anticipation element of horror and the slasher element you were talking about. This is kind of a masterpiece in my eyes, if I'm being blunt.
And it ties in with the idea of like, like kids being just let on their own, and just talking to toys and stuff. Like, is that healthy for them? Because like this feels very much like Nightmare on Elm Street in that there's a very real threat, but in their world and our world, it's an impossible killer. Like, no one is going to believe you if you say that this doll is alive. And so the horror isn't only just in the build up and then the payoff of a kill. It's constant. I mean, Chucky can just sit there and no one will believe that doll is responsible. And the blame, throughout, like, just trying to explain this, Andy comes off as crazy, Karen comes off as crazy, even the cop at the end says, like, who's going to believe me? Like, it's what makes Chucky so dangerous, is because even if you survive him, it makes you look like the guy who did it.
Yeah, and I think that's implied that's why we never see the mum again, is that she's in a fucking asylum.
Yeah, that is. We'll talk about it, but that is such a bleak character turn in the second one. Just in the opening of this Child's Play 2, they're just like, yeah, the mother got put into a psychiatric ward.
I think that's something that you could miss as a casual watch of Child's Play. The undercurrent of darkness and, I don't want to say realism because, there's a killer doll, but kind of, if there was a killer doll, they've addressed how it would be to the people who see this killer doll with like the psychological damage and the situation you talked about where no one will believe us. And you could miss that when there's a screaming ginger-haired good guy doll with a knife going rah, 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 and killing people. But there is a level of sophistication that I think some people don't accredit to the Child's Play franchise.
Precisely, yeah. And it's incredibly dark to think about how, 8-year-old Andy Hare, he eventually does come back in the later sequels, and in that world, he has to live with the idea that his mother got put away because everyone thinks she went crazy and killed people.
The long-term storyline of the Child's Play franchise is Andy's fucking trauma, and that's so bleak.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's so funny though as well, because they sort of did the same thing with Bride of Chucky, where how two characters think the other one is the killer, but then at the end of the film, like, a detective comes in and he sees the Chucky dolls and he's like, "Oh, I guess you guys are innocent then." And then that's sort of the end of the film, where it's like, are they getting off the leash? Because, like, there's still loose ends. Someone has to be the killer.
Yeah. One thing I will say about not just Child's Play, but the franchise as a whole, whilst Joseph Franzetti's soundtrack is really thematic and scary, and it's really cool, there isn't an iconic theme. You've got so many films, and not all horrors, but Tubular Bells from The Exorcist, and the Psycho theme, and the Reanimator stole the Psycho theme, etc., etc. I don't feel like there's an iconic theme for Chucky.
Definitely not in the first one. I mean, the credits has, from the score, it's a really like a good, it's great score, but it's hard to like hum, and it doesn't really have a theme. Child's Play 2 also has, again, really good music, but you can't quite hum it. It's not there's not really a motif in there.
You know what I'm getting at? Everyone can do the theme from Halloween.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And everyone knows the Jaws theme, and that is something that Chucky doesn't have.
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd say the strongest you've got is the music from Child's Play 2 because they use that in like the trailers for the new Chucky. So it seems like they're bringing back some of the old music. But
Mm,
again, yeah, it's not as memorable as like John Carpenter's score.
I would argue that probably the music associated most with the Chucky franchise is the soundtrack or the music inspired by Bride of Chucky, because that album is iconic.
Yeah, it definitely becomes a case of like they definitely use less score in the later films, especially of those two, Bride and Seed. Yeah, there's a lot of
Mm.
real music in those.
Real music. I'll tell Joseph Renzetti what you said about him.
This is me in the like 1978 as a producer on Halloween. Like, Carpenter, get some real music.
So rude. I want to talk about the Chucky eye view because it's really good. Oh, it's
Oh
just so creepy as fuck the way they slightly wobble the camera like it's a child running around, and it's on exactly the right height, and he's creepily fast, and it's just great. It's just so kind of done with real care and love, I think.
it is. It's very well done, and it's just like Jaws in the fact of them.
Yes.
Well, very much similar. The same thing of I think when Mancini wrote the script, he was like, "Well, Gremlins had just come out, and they did wonderfully with those animatronics, so we can do it just fine." And then like the people in charge, Kevin Yeager was I think the guy in charge, and he's been involved in many of the sequels. He was like, "Yeah, they weren't that advanced. We very much had trouble working this Chucky doll." So a lot of it is like off screen, and it again, I've said that maybe it's not my favorite Chucky film because he's off screen so much, but as a film, it works really well.
I think it's to the benefit that you don't see that much Chucky, because when you see Chucky, it's all that more impactful, particularly kind of like as the face kind of chronologically distorts and becomes more evil as it goes along. I think that's really well done.
It is really well done, and it is, as I say, it's a horror film, but this, by and large, I think more than any of the other films, this is like a suspense film because
Yeah, I'd
it
agree with that.
really leans on the suspense of and they do lay it on thick. I mean, even with the prologue, it's like Andy isn't the killer; it's the doll. But like the suspense is everyone thinking it's Andy, and
Yeah.
like the big midpoint of the film is Karen, confronting the doll and finally getting that reveal that the doll is real, and it's Brad Dourif's voice and that intense rage coming through. Like it's all build up to that, yeah.
The battery scene, that's just iconic. It's so good. The true psychological horror. You haven't seen anyone stab anyone. That is just I think that is the most scary part of the film, the realization from the mum.
Yeah, and that's why again, like we were saying, like it's not about Chucky being on screen; it's about everything else. It's
Mm,
really it's good filmmaking.
yeah, and this film isn't gory. Let's be blunt. There's what? I mean, the doll gets a right kick in at the end, but it's a fucking doll. There's very little gore in this film.
I think that's why certain reviewers like Ebert and Moulton did like this film because it's not gory. It's compared to other slashers because this is '88, so we've already
Mm.
had multiple Fridays, and Nightmare on Elm Street had come out, so films were getting very gory at this point. And yeah, you're right. I mean, someone gets hit on the head with a hammer and they fall out a window. That's not gory. I thought it was sort of story wise odd that Chucky would be so vengeful against his old partner Eddie, and then Eddie gets a rather impersonal death. He just gets blown up.
So yeah, so he's a brutal killer, but visually it isn't gory. Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's definitely more blood in Child's Play 2, and that's when they started leveling it up.
that's a nice way of putting it, leveling it up. But it's got everything you want from a horror film. You've got stuff like the jump scare in the car. That got me. Even though I knew it was coming, that got me.
Yeah, again, that's a really good, not not leaning on violence, not using violence as a crutch. That's a really good just action and build up and stuff. Yeah, that's a really good sequence. Yeah,
And my favourite thing in horror films is innovative murder. And the knife through the seat was really, really cool with that kind of thing. And there's just, it felt like there was a lot of creativity, a real passion project to some extent, this film, I think.
definitely. Yeah, and I think that everyone involved, they knew, this is going to be different than other slashers. It's a doll. It's like a 2 foot person. They need to highlight how everything would be different. I think they do a really good job at that.
Now, I will always love these films, but watching them more critically, making notes for a podcast, there were two scenes that I was like, ugh. First one was the homeless rapist was really quite unpleasant. That scene,
Yeah, that sticks out.
maybe it's not that it hasn't aged well because it's kind of, it's a misogynistic statement, etc., etc., but it feels incongruous to a film that isn't gory, that suddenly there's this real horrible threat of rape that
Yeah.
almost seems out of place because it's not a really grubby film.
Well, when you start looking at the film closely, I don't know if it's Mancini or Holland, because it certainly doesn't come up in any of the sequels. There is such a weird, like, unconscious message about, like, not going into the slums.
Yeah.
Like, Karen is poor, but she still has a nice apartment and she still has a nice job. And then she ventures just out of her neighborhood, and then suddenly it's just like homeless people everywhere. I don't know what the film is trying to say about that.
It does go back to what I was saying about a bit tropey in places of, the wrong side of town is definitely a trope, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very weird. And again, it's a weird aspect of like Charles Lee Ray as a character, that him and his friends were like down and out, and he lives in that shitty like abandoned apartment and stuff. It's just a weird story and character aspect that never gets revisited.
The other scene I didn't like was the electroshock therapy. And I was like, was that even legal in 1988? And then I looked it up. It's still legal now in both America and the United Kingdom. I was stunned.
It is very much now like specific parties that are like, yeah, this is still good, and then a lot of vocal opposition.
I just find it insane. I thought it was so outdated in 1988, but actually doing some research on it happens lots, and a lot of it is still non-consensual, and it's like, holy shit. I thought this film was backward. Turns out that all it's done is told me that the world is fucking backward.
Exactly. I mean, well, I don't know if you want to put words in people's mouths. Maybe this is Mancini talking about conversion therapy and stuff.
Maybe.
Maybe I know there's maybe
Right.
an essay there, but yeah, I would at least hope that those machines, you can't just crank them up to 11 because I think Chucky just turns a dial and that's enough to kill the guy. I hope that isn't how those machines work.
I mean, in that case, I think if he's doing electroshock therapy, the motherfucker deserves that. That feels a little bit poetic justice, really. But yeah, watching this film made me discover something that made me quite angry.
Yeah, scenes like that do kind of. I mean, the hospital ties in the whole homelessness thing as well, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
it's like they were just like weird feral children just wandering the hallways of that hospital, and it's like, what is going on in this town? There's certain
Mm.
aspects of this town that just feel like Gotham or something, and I don't know if they're.
Yeah.
I guess what they're going for is the what the marketing companies are selling, and then crossed with the reality of what people are living in. I guess that's what they're trying to get at.
Yeah, and it it feels a bit clunky, but not clunky enough to the point where it's to the detriment of the film. We've already said how I feel like the concise, tight plotting is actually a beneficial thing. So there will always be a balance when it comes to that, won't there?
Precisely. We're questioning it, but only looking at it in detail. The film never lingers on any of this.
No. And it doesn't linger on anything because it has a good 20 solid minutes of fucking hell, edge of your seat ending where the baddie won't fucking die, and I'm all about it. The ending of this film is everything, man.
It's incredible. It's so different from the rest of the film. It's like once we know who Chucky is, I mean, even in the midway point we learn who Chucky is, and then he just runs away, and you get bits and pieces of him, and then yeah, they saved it all for the finale. It's like the end of Jaws. How once you've got the people on the boat and you've got the shark, it never lets up. Like because there's no reason for it to let up, and
Yeah.
he just never stops. It's like Lord of the Rings. There's so many endings to this where there's so many endings where it's like they've killed Chucky and then he just keeps coming back.
You can't compare it to Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was a massive indulgence, whereas this was just tense as fuck, unrelentless horror magnificence.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to say to the point of parody, but it's like there's almost a sadness to it when Chucky is burnt to a crisp. He's getting his arms, his legs, his head blown off, and he's just writhing on the floor.
It's like just put him out of his misery.
And even then, like his one-armed, one-legged torso is still trying to kill people.
It's brilliant, and I think the undefeatable element, the how can you stop him element, it's just great, and it's again tropey, but it's done so well.
Yeah, and I feel like it all works within the story of the film as well. Like Charles Lee Ray is this killer who is getting used to being in this new body, and he visits some of his old accomplices to try and like see how to get out of this. So there's story with the killer as well. He's not just a killer doll now. There's story about him being a killer doll, and yeah, by the end of it, it's just like, is he trapped in it? Is he reveling in it? There's stuff going on as the action is happening, so it's just so much. It's a big finale.
It's wonderful. For me, Child's Play is a almost perfect, whilst still tropey, schlocky horror film. It's one of my favourites, and I think it always will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think if any of these people creatively weren't involved, then this could have been like a straight to video B horror.
Mm.
It had all the right talent involved to get it to where it needed to be this A class theatrical film.
It's a classic, and it deserves that. It's right up there with Hellraiser and Saw and all the other first ones before a load of other sequels that weren't as good, as a really iconic horror film that has lasted the test of time.
Yeah, it definitely, yeah, like watching it as the start of a franchise is really interesting and really fun to see all the intentional and unintentional starts to a saga. But at the same time, you can just stop at Child's Play 1 if you want. It's a really strong solo film.
There's a lot of film franchises where I might suggest you do that, but not Chucky.
Exactly, yeah. I would love for people to keep watching Child's Play, but it is such a strong opener.
I agree. Have we missed anything that you wanted to talk about, Dev?
I can look through my notes. I mean, it's really just asides. God, one thing, if you're talking about scenes that stick out, there's a very weird line where he says, I have a date with a 6-year-old boy.
Yeah, that's
That
quite
is.
creepy.
I mean, I feel like that was meant to be creepy, meant to be kind of
Yeah.
funny. It's just, he sort of delivers it very deadpan, so it's very weird.
I feel like a gag like that is darker now. I think it would have obviously been referencing the same thing.
I feel if Chucky said it now, it would be like, oh, well, he's just crazy, so he's just making a joke. Whereas in the first film, it's like, is that a part of his character? It's like the first Nightmare on Elm Street, where it's like,
Yeah.
is he just a killer? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't think it would have the level of unpleasantness in 1988 compared to that line potentially having if it was made now. I presume there isn't a line like that in the remake.
No, I don't think they ever reference anything as dark as that in the remake. No, the remake is one of the strengths of the remake is it's quite a fun film.
Right.
I think we barely talked about him, but like Detective Norris is
That's a good point, actually. He's quite an important
he's
character,
an
and
important
all we've talked about is him getting strangled in a car.
yeah, but that's the thing in terms of like the franchise. Like he never comes back and he's never referenced. The most we get referenced is in Child's Play 2, where he denied everything and said that Karen was crazy, which was a real dick move. But
It's a realistic move,
but yeah,
and
it
particularly for the 80s, a man would quite happily throw a woman under the bus, wouldn't he?
which is especially a dick move since he seems to be very clearly coming onto her throughout the film.
Maybe that's why he did the dick move, because she didn't go for
Oh,
it.
what a dick character! And it's he's an odd character because he gets attacked by Chucky halfway through the film, and then never at any point tells Karen that he knows this. He just joins in like, "Oh yeah, I've been investigating Charles Lee Ray, and maybe you've got a point," even though he knows that Chucky is a killer doll.
Yeah, yeah. He's definitely an 80s character, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just a weird character arc for him. And then I guess another weird character is John Bishop, the voodoo priest.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen a little more background on the voodoo. It's basically wiggity, wiggity, wiggity. We got some voodoo. Plot device.
In the 2 hour cut, apparently there was more of him. Like
Right,
there's a scene of him like healing a baby to show that because he talks about how Chucky distorted his magic for evil, and so
right.
he was going to be more of an evidently good voodoo priest. But yeah, that's just such a weird moment because I remember Mancini didn't really like the inclusion of the voodoo, even though that becomes a through line of the franchise. Because
Yeah.
there's like the voodoo dolls, so that just works. There's just so much magic in this world that is never really alluded to.
I mean, I would refer to it as vague voodoo rather than voodoo because it really doesn't give you anything other than voodoo's real here.
It opens up the idea that there is much more magic in this world, and we never see any of it. It's just
Hmm.
this one spell to some god Dambala, and then that's it. And you get weird when they visit Charles Lee Ray's apartment, and there's all those murals of there's a weird mural of Charles Lee Ray, and it looks like Brad Dourif. It's a nude Charles Lee Ray crouched and praying to the voodoo John Bishop, and
Weird.
it's such a weird image. But again, that's like it's something never really explored, like the life of Chucky before Chucky.
Yeah.
It's a lean film and it leaves you to imagine that stuff.
We are in a world where people really seem to like prequels. You could totally have a crime thriller explaining the background of Charles Lee Ray.
I remember in Curse of Chucky, they do have a flashback of Charles Lee Ray, and it's very funny because it's like Brad Dourif at that age with like the long Tommy Wiseau wig on, and
Fuck's sake.
he looks so much old. Oh my god, it's even more like Tommy Wiseau because he has like these thick sunglasses on as well.
For
Because
fuck's sake.
they try to hide that he is like 30 years older than he was in Child's Play 1.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy to poke fun at films and stuff they get wrong, but I don't feel like it was particularly easy with this. If what we're doing is we're looking ahead and starting to poke fun rather than finding anything we can poke fun in Child's Play itself, it says a lot about Child's Play to me.
It does, yeah. I think that's why it ended up with like, a 71% and stuff. Like I think it's so straightforward in what it is. It's a B movie dressed up as an A movie. And well, not dressed up. It's a B movie, evolved into an A movie. And I
Yeah.
think that effort really shows and that talent really shows.
Yeah, and I think later on it definitely becomes a B movie franchise.
Yeah. But like very distinctly B movie. But not in a look how bad we can get. It's just
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. B movie to me just suggests low budget but quite creative in a lot of ways.
precisely, yeah. I mean, it's everything you could want in a B movie versus like I mentioned it before. Like, I mean, Puppet Master, even the first Puppet Master. Good lord, that is a slow, low budget movie. That, oh,
I mean, we can look at Puppet Master in future if you want. I can't say I'm totally enthused.
We could look at Puppet Master 1 and then...
Maybe not do the rest of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are like 13 sequels.
13? Fuck me.
There's a lot.
Let's just do Puppet Master.
There's really so little continuity. If you want to talk prequels, half of the Puppet Master sequels are set during World War II.
Oh no! We've not got time, and I'm too old to talk about Puppet Master prequels. But this has been an absolute pleasure, and I knew it would be. So, Dev, thank you for joining me. Where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on Twitter at @AbsoluteTravisT, and I believe in my bio I've got links to my other places. I was on Twitch. I'm going to be on Twitch soon. If you want to hear another horror podcast that I did, which is on a 2, maybe 3 year hiatus now, check out Forever Friday on podcast services. We managed to talk about the first Friday the 13th and about half of Friday the 13th Part 2, and we talked about 13-minute chunks for about an hour each. So there's like a good 8 hours of content just talking about Friday the 13th. If you want to talk about horror in minute detail.
Well, if you're looking for me, it's at MarkAdamsHC on Twitter and Instagram. I'm all over the We Made This network on lots of shows, including Podcast 616, Right in the Childhood, Shipwrecked and Comatose, and others. But if you do want to hear me talking more about horror, I was a regular guest host. I think I'm on about 30 or 35 episodes of a podcast called Super Tat Film Club with my friends Malachi J. Matthews and Hollywood Fletch. We picked a B movie once a week and had a laugh chatting about it. So if you like me talking about horror, you can find Super Tat Film Club all over your favourite listening platform of choice. If you're listening here, you can probably find it wherever you're listening. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week for Child's Play 2. And until then, wanna play? Chucky Vision is a podcast brought to you by the We Made This network. Follow us on Twitter at CHUCKYVISION. Follow the network on Twitter at WMT_network. Our website is WeMadeThisNetwork.com. The logo was designed by Dev, and the theme tune composed by Dark Fantasy Studios. Wanna play?
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Elsewhere on We Made This. Pick a disc.
The chorus feels like it's improvised as well.
It's improvised, but I also think it's like respect, because everybody gets a shout out. Busta Rhymes in effect. Shaheed is in effect. Fife Dog is in effect. And I think towards the end, I know towards the end, who's in the house? Ron Carter is in the house. So I kind of think of it, this is going to be very professorial sounding, but if you write a research paper and you put all your citations of your sources.
Yeah.
It's all the citations. These are all the folks that made this come together.
He's reading the Wikipedia footnotes for this song, isn't he? So like 30,
Exactly.
20 years before it came into effect and stuff.
Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast.
To your theory, Gene Roddenberry, one of his golden rules was that conflict always had to be external, right? Like it couldn't be internal. You couldn't have, the main drama being between the two people on the show. It always had to be humanity fighting outward because we were already connected and we had already resolved most of those issues, right? And as Trek has evolved and we've started to incorporate many of the real life drama that can occur between actual people, which I think it's made the show all the better for it. Yeah. But I think you're onto something.
Right in the childhood.
The big thing is, Raven has a vision that the job she was going for, she didn't get because the woman says to Raven's vision, I don't hire black people. We cringed both times.
Just the fact that it was done with the actor playing the racist job assistant,
Chloe,
did it with real venom and the kind of.
She did it throughout everything though. Like
it was horrible.
She was not so subtle with how she felt about black people. Chelsea couldn't pick up on it.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.